Marangyari Nadu Yinjama Wurundjeri Mai Wurundjeri Nurrumbunga. I want to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people on whose lands we are meeting tonight. A year ago, the Albanese government came to office. What's happened since? For many people, life seems harder. Is there light at the end of the tunnel? Well, joining our all-political panel, Independent Senator for Tasmania from the Jackie Lambie Network, Tammy Tyrrell. Infectious disease expert turned Labor member for Higgins, Ananda-Rajah. Independent Senator for the ACT and former captain of the Wallabies, David Pocock. Liberal member for Flinders, McKenzie, the first woman to hold that seat in Victoria. And Greens member for Griffith, Chandler-Mather, who is fighting the government's housing deal. For these first-term politicians, is politics everything it's cracked up to be? Thank you for the welcome. I'm Stan Grant, and remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quanda is the hashtag, so get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Anaru August.
Hi everyone. I have been disgusted by the hatred and abuse that has been fired at Stan Grant because of his colour and the... because of his colour and the articulation of his professional essence. I asked the panel, what needs to happen to stop hate speech, hate culture and hate acceptance from continuing to be a fabric of Australia?
Anara, thank you so much, my brother. Thank you so much for that. David.
We've clearly got a long way to go, and I think the voice is an opportunity to have that conversation. I think we really need more leadership from politicians to stop playing the politics with us and recognise this for the opportunity it is to take up a generous offer from First Nations people, a consensus position from them on how we can start to address some of the systemic issues we're seeing. It's not going to solve racism, but I really think it is a step forward together. And you know, from my time in rugby, I think one of the things that really struck me and has stayed with me is when you see someone like Stan being, you know, what's happening to him, or when you were watching Adam Goodes getting booed, that's not just Adam Goodes getting booed, that has a ripple effect. And to see my Indigenous teammates and the effect that that had on their mental health, this is something that we're going to have to come to terms with as a country. We've got a long way to go, and it's going to take leadership, mature debate. But you know, you look around, we can be better. We have to believe that we can be. Michelle?
There's no place in our community for vilification based on any attribute, whether it be the colour of your skin, your sexuality, your gender, whatever. And modern Australia hasn't happened by accident. We are a melting pot. We are a triumph. And we have a degree of social cohesion in this world that is the envy of the world. So that is something to be treasured and to be protected and to be defended by not just leaders, but by all of us. So we have responsibilities to each other to maintain that social cohesion. On the issue of race, I would say this, that the most powerful debiasing force in our community is actually contact. It's contact with different cultures, both in your workplace, in your homes, and on your sporting fields. And the issue, I think, with First Nations people, and Stan, correct me if I'm wrong, is that they're only at 3.8%. They are an extreme minority in this country. You can live your whole life and never meet anyone with First Nations heritage. And I think that is the problem here, that we just do not understand their lived experience. We do not understand what intergenerational trauma means. We don't understand that it passes down from one generation to another like a bad gene, and it just cascades. And until we actually listen with an open heart and with curiosity, we will never understand. So I would say to people, we have an opportunity later this year, and we're going to hold a mirror up to ourselves. We better like what we see.
I think there's a practical thing here as well, though, because having read your article, Stan, one of the crucial things that happened in this instance was ABC invited Stan to talk on the coronation, knew that Stan was a proponent of the Republic, and then when the inevitable racist backlash occurred, ABC executives did not stand up and back in Stan Grant. And I think there's a lot of practical things, and I agree with a lot of what the panel said. But it's also about leaders in an organisation standing up and saying, you know what, this is not good enough, and backing in your people. Can I just say, we're having a debate in this country about a First Nations voice. At the same time as one of the most public people in the ABC and in the media has basically been bullied and harangued out of a position of basically facilitating a debate on Q&A. And has been done so. I don't think, like, I imagine, Stan, you cop racist abuse all the time, every single day. But when you don't have your own people backing you up, I imagine, from reading your article, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I think that, I think ABC and all sorts of organisations need to hold a mirror up and say, when that happens, we need to have their back and know that they're part of a broader family.
Yeah.
Thank you. I am going to have something to say about this towards the end of the program, so I want to address some of these things directly.
Stan, may I make some observations?
Yeah.
I didn't at the moment. Thank you for the question, but mostly, Stan, thank you for your grace and your kindness and your continuing openness and your love towards others. What you have been through, what your family's been through, the testimony some of your family members made today, the outpouring of love we saw for you today, that gives me hope. Yeah. Yes, we have the voice this year, but it's our duty every day to be asking ourselves questions as to how we got here and how we get beyond it. Even tonight, flying down on the plane, Qantas makes an announcement about providing a safe and respectful workplace for everyone. And I thought to myself as I listened to it, how did we get to that point? To some extent, as political people, we expect to be yelled at all the time. Maybe we've all become a bit too thick-skinned. Maybe we need to bring grace back into our daily conversation with each other.
Thank you, Zoe. And I'm just wondering about that too, because part of what the comment that I made in my article was to criticise us in the media as well, because I think we bear responsibility for a lot of what happens and the distortion that happened of words that I had tried to speak with love and respect. But I'm just wondering, where did this rot set in your view? David said politics needs to be better. I know that media needs to be better. What about social media? Yeah. Where did the rot set in?
Of course, that's because because everyone feels no limit. There's no restriction to what people feel free to put out in social media, and then that bleeds into other areas. You know, we saw that in the campaign. There was some real nastiness in the campaign, and on racial and gender and other grounds. So I'm not sure if it's self-restraint, because I wish those feelings weren't there in the first place, but we've certainly got to name it. We've got to address it, and we have to think about things like social media, online debate, because there are no guardrails.
Can I just say too, we're all grown-ups and we're educating our children and our communities, and if we're not brave enough to stick up for each other, what the hell are we doing here? It makes no sense that you will cut down your neighbour, your best mate or your work colleague just to make yourself feel better. Stick up for each other. Go out there. That kid on the bus, stick up for him. The girl in the street who fell over, or she's got toilet paper or a skirt stuck up the back of her pants, tell her for Christ's sake. She doesn't deserve to be ridiculed and embarrassed in mainstream life. That's what we should be doing. We should be helping each other out.
We are going to return to some of these questions a little bit later. We'll hear now, though, from Hannah Thomas.
Hi, this question is directed to the Greens member of Griffith, Sir Max. Do you think the Greens blocking the new housing affordability scheme pushed by the government is an example of the Greens blocking something that's good in order to attain something that they regard as perfect? Isn't something better than nothing?
Thanks for the question. Look, The first point to make is Labor's Housing Australia Future Fund, which is, I imagine, what you're referring to, could well be nothing. So you've heard a lot in the media about the fact that it's this $10 billion housing fund. That's not what it is. It's $10 billion that they want to gamble on the stock market via the government's future fund and only spend the returns on housing. Now, last year the future fund lost 1.2%, so it would have lost $120 million, and we would not have seen a cent in funding. Our point to the government is you do not fund schools or hospitals via this sort of funding mechanism that may actually lose money in a given year. And right now, there is a shortage in this country of 640,000 social and affordable homes. 640,000. Even in the best case scenario, at the end of Labor's 5-year plan, there'll be more people waiting for social housing, over 700,000. There'll be millions of renters who will have no protection at all because Labor's plan has nothing for renters. And what we've said to the government is we're willing to negotiate in good faith, but we want to be able to guarantee money every year, billions of dollars to be invested in public and affordable housing, and have real action for renters so that those renters right now, thinking about that next rent increase that may see them sleeping in their car, have actually a light at the end of the tunnel. And in a wealthy country like this, where a budget can find $300 million for the stage 3 tax cuts, we think they can find a few $1 billion a year to invest in housing in the middle of the worst housing crisis we have seen in generations.
Sure.
We have what I would describe, and I can say this as a doctor because I've been in a few emergencies in my time, this is a housing code blue. Now, we have got an absolutely massive housing agenda. I'm going to start with the National Housing Accord. This is being led by the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. 1 million homes, a shared ambition with multiple partners to be built from 2024 onwards. In the last budget, we put in place tax incentives to boost the build-to-rent sector. Property Council estimates this will deliver 150,000 homes. In addition to that, in the last budget, 2 weeks ago, we released $2 billion. This is on top of the $1.6 billion from the previous budget in October and $575 million that we've already pumped into the system to get homes built, and they are being built. At the moment, we have in the Senate a bill that has the support of David and Tammy. And it is being blocked by the Liberals and the Greens, the Housing Australia Future Fund, and all kinds of misinformation is circulating around this bill. Far from being a gamble on the stock market, Australia's future funds have returned on average 9%, 9.1% to be precise, every year for the last 10 years. There are other future funds in that cohort. One of them is the Medical Research Future Fund. That MRFF funded me when I was a doctor and a researcher. It backed me in. The Housing Australia Future Fund will back in Australians and give them the funding certainty and sustainability that we need going forward. We can't wait any longer. We can't dither. We need to get this done, and we need this bill to be passed.
Tammy, you've helped negotiate this. One of the concerns here from Max is that this won't deliver. Are you convinced it will?
I believe it will deliver. I know that there are 700 opportunities in Tasmania that once this legislation is ticked off can start tomorrow. As soon as that's signed off, they can start. For Tasmania, 1,200 homes is going to mean a lot. It's predicted in the next 5 years, 1,100 people in Tasmania will become homeless. They're not currently homeless, they're going to become homeless. And that's a 75% increase in Tasmania out of the last census data. I understand that people are frustrated, but if we don't start building homes, we're not going to be able to have homes to rent. We're not going to have homes for people to go into. If we don't start now, if we don't start soon, it's going to take even longer. It'll take up to 6 to 12 months longer.
Max is sitting here now. You can say something directly to Max about this. What would you say to him?
I'd say, Max, I understand that you want more. I get that. But there's people out here in other states and territories as well as my home state of Tasmania that need a home now. And the longer we take, the longer it's going to take to build the houses. And we need to make sure that people are looked after, because that's what I got elected to do.
Completely agree. And one of the points with Labor's housing plan is that it may not see a single home built until after the next federal election in 2025, because the first thing they need to do is get the money put it in the stock market, wait for it to generate a return, and then spend the money.
This is complete misinformation. I'm sorry.
What governments used to do and what they should do, like health and education, you saw in the federal budget, was to take money and invest directly in building schools, hospitals. Like, why is it...
So
this is a sustainable funding model into
take the 30 billion, the 10 billion and invest that straight away?
Well, we're saying we should guarantee a certain amount of money is spent every year on public and affordable housing. Can I just say... in Tasmania, for instance, the federal government is cutting funding for just over 1,000 affordable NRAS properties. The shortage of social and affordable housing in Tasmania is just over 14,000 homes. And the federal government's plan, as it currently stands, cannot guarantee a certain amount of money will be spent every year on housing.
Why does every housing minister around Australia support this?
David's trying to get a word in here. David?
Michelle said I support this. I've said to the government that I don't think it's enough. The Medical Research Future Fund is $21 billion, which I think is great.
It's grown.
Yes. This is a $10 billion fund. And for me, sure, it's a start. It's very frustrating, though, that the government won't move on really sensible things like they say that the return over time is 9%, yet they've capped it at 5%. It can only disperse $500 million a year, even if it returns $900 million. Why are we doing that with housing? Like, I think it can be better. I'm not going to stand in the way of this.
Well, we're going to have a lot more discussion about this issue of housing. We'll keep it going now with a question from Lauren O'Connell.
I suppose speaking into this issue, with so many people looking to find just one house to live in, how can we continue to subsidise investment properties through negative gearing?
Great question.
Michelle.
So taxation on housing is a really vexed issue in this country, and it's principally because your house is your biggest asset, and people are highly invested in their homes, as you would expect them to be. Now, it's not just about negative gearing. If you're going to have a discussion about taxation on homes, you also have to then wrap in stamp duty and land tax and zoning restrictions and the whole lot of it.
But negative gearing has become a symbol of the inequity in this. I mean, I can ask you...
It's become a lightning rod, but the reality is that even if you made adjustments to negative gearing, it would be tinkering around the edges. And one thing I've learned as a doctor is that in a crisis, you never tinker around the edges. You go to the root cause. That 2016 was a time we built the maximum number of homes, and it's been declining. It's been declining steadily for the last 7 years, and that's because successive Liberal governments basically vacated the space. And we're now in a situation where over the last 7 years, our population has grown. Children have grown up. They want to live near where they work. And the pandemic has also changed the way we live. We, in fact, have fewer people living in dwellings, which means we need more dwellings.
Is part of the problem here, though...
Part of the issue really is supply. The issue is supply.
Well, is it supply or is it people who have multiple homes? According to Crikey...
Stan. I mean,
here are some numbers, Michelle.
It's supply. We have
144 politicians out of 227 own more than one property. That's 63%. 37%, 84 MPs, own 3 or more properties, which is you, Michelle, isn't it?
Of course, and Greens senators. There's about 19, owned by Green senators and Green MPs. So I'd say that the issue is with investors who invest in property. They actually end up letting it out. They tenant it out. And that's what I've done with my properties.
But that's become a source of...
But it doesn't solve the problem of supply.
Becomes a source of great wealth, doesn't it? David, you own multiple homes?
I've got one investment property which is on the market.
Just one?
Yes. And I think this is a vexed issue for the major parties. Like, you talk to the crossbench, and we're hearing from people, and I certainly believe that this is a conversation we have to have. It costs us $20 billion a year between capital gains tax discounts and negative gearing. That is an extraordinary amount of money. And for a country that is now so reliant on personal income tax, we're up to 48% of our tax comes from personal income tax. The major parties aren't willing to actually look at these things, which you talked about the root cause. This seems to actually go to the root cause, where you're actually incentivising investment in property above a whole bunch of other good investments. it may have made sense at a time, but I don't think it does anymore. It's something we have to be able to...
It's not going to increase supply, David. That's the issue. We need to increase supply.
Actually, I might just bring Zoe in here, because Zoe,
Stan?
your side of politics didn't touch this either.
Well, I'm beginning to wonder what I'm doing wrong in my career, because I only have one home. I don't have any business. Anyway.
We'll give you time.
Exactly, made the wrong choices. Look, I agree with Michelle and Max in a way, insofar as I think it is all about supply. I think we could make more land available tomorrow, and I agree with you that the problem is right now. Right now, I have 1,500 people sleeping on the foreshore down on the Mornington Peninsula. The problem is right now.
And you have an increasing number of Airbnbs, for instance.
Oh, absolutely. So 30% of properties in the Mornington Peninsula are not tenanted all the time. But when you say to people, could you think about putting it on the market for permanent rental, they say, between land tax and rates and maybe never, how would I put it, and the incumbents of the Residential Tenancies Act, they just think, oh, I don't know, maybe, yeah, and it's much more lucrative to be on Airbnb, so that's what they go for. In fact, that's what real estate agents encourage you to do down there.
So why don't, I'll come to you, Max, in a minute, but why don't politicians, we're looking at the two major parties here, want to touch this? Is this just the third rail? We know Labor took that to the 2019 election and lost. There may be a bit of reform, they may be a bit gun-shy about that sort of reform now. What about your side of politics?
Look, I think, as Michelle says, the area of taxation on property is fraught. There are lots of different types of taxes that apply. In Victoria in particular, we've seen a huge surge in land tax, huge, particularly down on the peninsula. So if you're going to take in one, you've got to take in all of them, right? Some of them are state-based taxes, some of them are federal taxes. It's not a reason not to do it. It's not a reason to shy away from it, but it is to recognise that the conversation is complex and federal.
Max, you're our renter on the panel. You don't own a home. But you can't afford rent, and a lot of people can't.
Yeah. Absolutely. The biggest, just on negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions, the biggest line item in this federal budget was the billions of dollars this country spends every year in tax concessions for property investors via negative gearing and capital gains tax concessions. Now, this is our point to the government, that why should we accept, in the worst housing crisis we've seen in generations, at most $500 million a year for social and affordable housing, and as David said, $20 billion in tax concessions for people who own upwards of... There was a guy called into the radio with 384 investment properties.
What?
384 investment properties.
That's way too many houses.
What the Greens have put to the government is if you phase out negative gearing for everyone with more than one investment property, so they get to keep one, and capital gains tax concessions, you raise $74 billion over the next 10 years. That could cover $5 billion a year for public and affordable housing and provide incentives to the states to freeze rent increases. Now, and I just wanted to touch on this question of supply, because you will hear... The line about supply is run most by the property industry because it suits them. Over the last 5 years, Australia has built just under 1 million homes. 1 million homes. There was 1 million homes vacant on the night of the census. The question is not property developers building more high-end homes no one can afford. The question is that right now housing is treated more as a financial asset as a result of the billions of dollars. As a result of the billions of dollars. And not as a place to call home. Now, the way to tackle the housing crisis, scrap negative gearing and capital gains, so a first home buyer gets a chance, and start to invest in public housing the way this country used to in the 20th century.
Stan, the problem... So the way this country used to invest in public housing, social and affordable housing, was through this thing called NRAS. And it was actually initiated by a Labor government, and then it was cancelled by Abbott in 2014. And as a result, these homes are now being retired. They're being flogged, basically, and they're declining. And so this is the purpose of having a future fund. A future fund basically delivers certainty and capacity and a knowing amount of money that will be dispersed into perpetuity.
In the meantime...
And it cannot be cancelled by any government, Labor or Liberal or whatever, down the track.
But in the meantime, people still don't have homes. I'll go back to Lauren on this. Lauren... listening to the answers tonight, discussion about taxation reform, about supply, does any of that speak to you? How convinced are you from what you've heard tonight?
I'm not overly convinced, and I think there is something to be said for viewing housing as an essential need rather than a business, something to be invested in. And right now our taxes equate to the business.
Tammy.
I've been living in a little old housing department house for the last 26 years. I had a chance to buy it back in the day, and I paid 48 grand for mine. And to me, that was an impossible dream back then, because I'm only 32, believe it or not. It's one of those things. My son, God forbid, he actually built a house just before COVID hit. He'd been saving since he was 14 and a half years old. But property prices in Tasmania are completely different to you mainlanders. Like, your prices are absolutely batshit crazy, and I don't think I'm allowed to swear. But you know what I mean? It is an impossible dream, and it makes me sad that my grandkids will probably be living in my back shed. I don't know if there's an easy answer. Yes, we need more homes. Yes, we need to look at stage 3 tax cuts. We need to tweak those. That'd be money coming back into our coffers from a higher end. It'd mean that you guys would have more money in your bank accounts as well, especially you young'uns, because you need it to go out and do all that good stuff. It's not an easy answer. It's not.
Can I just address that essential...
Max, how do you feel about developments in your own...
Yeah.
In your own electorate, though, because there are some issues around that, aren't there?
You've opposed 1,300 homes in your own electorate. Isn't that right, Max? Can you explain to the audience why you want to be a crusader for renters and yet you oppose 1,300 homes because the NIMBYs got to you?
OK, bizarre, but
no.
the way you're referring... I can address that.
Have you opposed them?
OK, on the one hand, what you're referring to is a large development in a floodplain, which your own Prime Minister has said we shouldn't be building in floodplains. And what we said... And look, what we said was that the federal government should buy back that land, and in the areas where aren't flood-prone, we should build public and affordable housing. Can I just say, the one piece of social housing I've been asked to comment on, I supported. And we have spent the year, in the lead up to this federal election, campaigning our butts off to stop the state government from selling off public housing in my electorate. They sold off 44 public homes in our electorate. The way I found out was door knocking and meeting this woman who was born in her public housing unit, and had just got kicked out. Was told she was going to get kicked out, and she was in tears. Now, I am sick, absolutely sick of a public debate. You just mentioned essential services, by the way. Imagine if there was 640,000 families waiting to get into a public hospital or a public school.
Well, there are.
And we're sitting here and saying what's good enough is $500 million a year for housing that will see the housing crisis get worse. You know, one of the worst things about politics is the way that we forget that these are people's
I'll give Michelle a quick response, and then we'll move on.
I find it extraordinary that the Greens could work cooperatively with the government and pass the safeguard mechanism, right, to impose tough emission controls on our heaviest emitters in this country. And yet this is the hill they choose to die on, on housing. When we have, tonight, 122,000 people sleeping rough. 80% of those are women. Where women go, children follow. 1 in 7 of those people are 12 years or less. They are children. They are babies. And they are standing in the way. They are standing in the way. It is not a gamble, and that is absolute misinformation. They are standing in the way because they want policy nirvana rather than pragmatism.
Well, David wants to just quickly, David.
Yeah.
Well, I would argue that the difference in the safeguard was that there was a genuine negotiation, and the government did give on a whole bunch of things. And we ultimately, I think, had a much stronger policy because the crossbench pushed them on a whole range of transparency issues, tightening a few things up. When it's come to the housing, it's basically been take it or leave it.
Well,
so
we could talk about
we could talk about this all night.
Yeah, we certainly could. And it's become such a touchstone issue. It's such an issue that goes to this question of fairness in our society. It gets us to the topic of our online poll tonight. We're asking you this: should negative gearing tax breaks be limited to one investment property? You can cast your votes anonymously on the Q+A Facebook, Twitter and YouTube accounts, or the ABC News Instagram account will bring you the results of that a little later. If you're just joining us, you're watching Q+A live with Tammy Tyrrell, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, David Pocock, Zoe McKenzie and Max Chandler-Mather. Now let's get to some other news this week. Here's Anthony Travo.
Thank you. My question is for the panel. We've seen some pretty egregious behaviour in the PwC tax scandal from greedy partners. This is another example of erosion of trust of a company who seems to only be sorry because they got caught. What controls will be put into place to ensure consultants who have engaged in this kind of behaviour are permanently banned from providing services to the government via the National Anti-Corruption Commission?
Tammy.
Look, I 100% agree, and thank you. I think the National Anti-Corruption is the perfect place to put this in to be tried out, because that should never have happened. We rely on these organisations to do all the hard lifting where public servants used to do it many moons ago. And previous governments actually axed a lot of jobs and have paid out millions and billions of dollars to these kind of agencies rather than giving all you guys that want to be in the public service. It can be okay.
So you believe this should go to the NAC?
It should go to the NAC, and if we need to tweak the legislation so as it can, yeah, I'd have a look at that.
David, we're at the question of laws broken here. Do you believe that that's something that should be looked at?
It's pretty horrendous what's happened. I mean, if someone did this to any one of us, we would never do business with that person again. I certainly wouldn't. And I think this warrants real investigation. Currently, we are prosecuting Richard Boyle for blowing the whistle at the ATO. We're prosecuting him for doing that. And yet we're seeing this sort of behaviour where we're paying people, and that's not enough. They're not happy to take the $1.4 billion we spend a year on the Big Four. They then use that to make even more money.
Yeah.
It's
insider trading.
So is this as a result of increasing reliance on consultancies? One of the things that the previous government boasted about was cutting the size of the public service, outsourcing a lot of things, going into big contracts with companies like this. Is this the inevitability of that?
No, look, I don't think so. I think, but
if it was in the public service, you would be able to keep a closer eye on it. Now, if you're outsourcing this, if these are the contracts that are being written, isn't this the risk?
To be fair, in my experience, recourse to outside advice is rare, but useful when you pursue it. Meaning you need to robustly test what it is you've got in front of you. You need to get outside advice. Sometimes some of these bigger firms have got international networks and can tell you what's happening elsewhere around the world in a way that the Australian public service may not always be able to do. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm mindful there's an investigation on foot and the Senate is rigorously examining what has happened. But you do want to recognise that the private sector should robustly test, should look at what we're doing, work out if it's the most efficient and effective way, or if there are other ways that are being pursued around the world that should be looked at as well.
No. Why are you shaking your head, Michelle?
No. So we have ended up in a situation, we've come to government and we've discovered that there is a public service and then there is a shadow public service, an over-reliance on external contractors in this country. Now, Katie Gallagher, the Minister for Finance, actually released an audit report last week, and wait for it, she found out that we have been spending the previous government in their last year, 2020-21, spent $21 billion. $21 billion on external contractors and external providers. The problem with this scenario... So are you going to wind this back? Are you saying to PwC now you're going to look at the specific contracts? We are going to wind this back, and we already have made... Contracts? Yeah, we're taking people off this rolling labour hire, this casualised, insecure workforce, and we're giving them permanent jobs. But the issue here is that people in the shadow public service are not bound by the Public Services Act. And so this exchange of information is somewhat fluid. Standards are somewhat blurred. And as a result, you don't get the kind of probity overlay that we've been
So what are you saying to PwC?
About.
What's the message here? Are you saying you're looking into those contracts?
PwC are, that was an egregious breach of trust. And
so the contracts that you have, the government has, what are you doing with those?
So the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, has announced that he wants to see a tightening up of the Taxation Practitioners Board immediately. But there'll be an ongoing investigation now into this, and we are looking closely on how we can tighten up processes. But Tammy mentioned the NAC. The NAC, is an important jurisdictional body that will have all the powers of a standing royal commission. So this should go to that? I won't even entertain saying something like that, because a NAC is chaired by independent commissioners, and they are the ones who decide on what comes forward. It's not up to politicians to say that.
Are you happy with that answer, if Michelle won't commit to that?
I think there'll be more discussions about this, but I believe the public service should have more people back into it, and that they should go to the NAC. And if they need a letter of support, I'll definitely give them one of them.
Isn't part of the problem that the Big Four accounting firms, including PwC, have donated, I think, over $4.2 million to the major parties over the last 10 years? And we have a situation where these accounting firms can donate to the major parties of government and then have received billions of dollars in contracts every year.
So
that is a fundamental problem. My point is that those donations should be banned. That no body or corporation Nobody or corporation who has a direct financial interest in the decisions of government like that, where they are literally bidding for contracts, shouldn't be able to turn around and donate millions of dollars to the parties who ultimately make that decision.
Don't
I think
unions
that's pretty
have an
bottom line.
interest, a financial interest in what government does as well?
Well, they're not bidding directly for contracts with the government. Like, we've got a situation here
They're
where
bidding for outcomes.
Well, in this case, the PwC was bidding donated to both the Labor and Liberal Party at the same time as they were giving advice on the one hand to corporations about how to dodge taxes, and then advice to the government on how to close tax loopholes, and they were providing clearly it alleged secret information between the two. I think that body should not be able to donate to a major political
We're beefing
party.
up the public service, and we're hoping that young Australians will see this as a destination of choice and a career of choice. I mean, we're here serving our country in these roles. You can also serve your country in the Australian public service.
Okay, we're going to go to our next question now from Amy Brown.
There is a sentence that has been rolling around in my head and in my soul since Jim Chalmers delivered his budget speech. And that sentence was, "We've done what we could afford." As a millennial and a young person, I am so tired of feeling like I am screaming into a political void here where we are not taken seriously. At what point are you going to stop acting on behalf of corporations and businesses and start acting on behalf of the people that put you in those seats?
I'll go to Michelle in a minute, but David, I'll put that one to you first. You're now in politics, you're up close to this. Is that what you see? More interest in the big end of town than ordinary people?
Look, I think there are so many good people in there wanting to represent their communities. I think often the line that they have to toe, that the major parties come up with, doesn't suit that. And I think it's the clearest, one of the clearest.
So do you agree with
examples.
Amy that people like Amy are being ignored and the big end of town is getting the rewards?
Well, I think housing is a great example of this. When it comes to defence and submarines, we hear that we cannot afford not to spend money on this. But we're not hearing the same urgency and priority when it comes to people in our communities, when it comes to health, when it comes to mental health, when it comes to housing. So I do think we're seeing that play out. Sorry, Amy, you.
There are a couple of places where we could make money back, though. PRRT, I call it Purity, so I remember the acronym.
The resource rent tax?
Yeah.
Which has been increased.
Yeah,
wow.
but it hasn't been...
Well, he says, not enough, you say.
Yeah, but it needs to be actually increased so that the people that are harvesting gas and oil and taking it overseas actually pay taxes here in Australia so that we can contribute back and give social services what they need.
Yep.
Just what are you...
Yeah?
So that would be great.
Yeah.
That's a good point. There's a couple of things that I want to say, though.
Yep.
69% of inflation is driven by excess corporate price gouging. Mm-hmm. Right now, that is what is driving it. Mm-hmm. So guess what happens? We have a reactionary response, which is to bump up interest rates. Guess what happens next? Who's announcing the profits next?
The banks.
The banks are announcing the profits. You know what? I am so unbelievably sick of these things, these reactions that are trying to control inflation, and we're trying to slow down the economy, and we can't find money. Oh, we've got money for stage 3 tax cuts, but we can't find money. We're going to keep upping the interest rate. I spoke to a friend who's at 7.5% interest rate on her mortgage.
This is after 11 interest rate increases.
That's it.
Zoe, stage 3 tax cuts
We could tweak them.
is your party's idea.
Yeah,
How do you justify that?
It is, and may I say I was surprised I heard Jim Chalmers endorse stage 3 tax cuts on insiders the week after the budget and say they were necessary for addressing bracket creep. But can I go to your main point about millennials?
But it's not just bracket creep. It is people on
$200,000
a year.
Look,
your party's policy, which Labor has now inherited.
$45,000 a year is better off. But can I say, you make a really good point about millennials, right? I interestingly don't. Sorry, I just hit my mic. I don't hear much from the big end of town at all, actually, but that's because I suppose I'm a pure backbencher. I listen, as a backbencher, I listen to my community all day, every day. I do my best to front up to as many schools as possible. We've got some of the school kids from my electorate here, basically to make sure I'm constantly getting the cold shower of what I need to be thinking about for that generation, right? What it means for 16, 17-year-olds in Australia today, what hope they have for the future and what we need to be doing to benefit them. The only bank I think I've come across is my community bank that's at every, race run and community fair and everything else. So I hear your frustration, but I try to reassure you that there's most of backbencher engagement is all community engagement. It's not the big end of town at all.
Michelle, Amy's sitting here.
Yeah, Amy, I can see your distress.
Can I just say one thing, though? Yeah. It's really interesting that you mentioned bracket creep. So I'm an accountant. Bracket creep impacts low and middle income earners. It doesn't impact the top
$200,000. And bracket
creep. We adjusted those brackets was before the global financial crisis, 2008.
So I'll go to you, Michelle, on this, because bracket creep, of course, is when people move up into other tax brackets, and it becomes a disincentive. But can you sit here and tell Amy why this government is still committed at a time when people can't put a roof over their heads to giving people on $200,000 a year an extra $10,000 a year in their pockets when the stage 3 tax cuts come into action?
So, sure.
So, Amy's sitting here. Tell her why.
Firstly, Amy, I can see your distress, and
it's not distress; it's rage.
I understand. I understand. In my community, half my electorate is under the age of 37. Everywhere you go, there are young people, right?
That wasn't the question. How come you're still committed to the stage 3 tax cuts?
So we legislated these. I mean, these were legislated, and we have made a commitment that we're not going to be repealing them. Or
would you like them to break that promise?
But I will say there is a dispute over the amount, the quantum. So $300 million has come from the Parliamentary Budget Office. In fact, another economist from the ANU has done an alternative analysis where he has taken the assumption that over time, governments, over a 10-year period, governments, Liberal or Labor, whichever it is, tend to adjust tax thresholds based on bracket creep. And when that analysis was done, and he did it a few years ago, in fact, the amount is $54 billion and it disappears by 2029. So depending on which you want to believe, there are two separate analyses around this. But that doesn't answer your question. At your question, you are telling me that you feel that you've been left behind. There's an entire generation of young people who have been left behind.
It's not me. It's so wild how you keep making things about individuals. I am not talking about me. I am talking about my generation. You want to know why the budget surplus, everyone is so mad about that? You want to know why it's so on the nose? Because it's exactly the same as the banks that have their surplus off the back of interest rate rises
the
supermarkets that are having their
budget surplus. In delivering a modest budget surplus, what that will actually mean is $83 billion less debt on young shoulders over the next 12 years.
This is really patronising. I'm so sorry.
No,
you are patronising me.
And that's why we have to make this...
David, I'm going to... David's been waiting very patiently. David.
So the question I heard was that we know that a big part of inflation is off the back of corporate profits. For the last year at least, the crossbench has been calling for a windfall profits tax. Gas companies made an extra $40 billion in the last year. The PRRT, the Petroleum Resource Rent Tax that Tammy talked about, the crossbench is saying, lift it. Experts are saying lift it. So
billions of
to date, offshore gas projects in Australia have paid 0 cents of PRRT. They have not paid a single cent. Labor is proposing that they bring some payments forward and that those who are never going to pay any because they have such big investment costs that they get to compound, they'll have a minimum spend. That's what Labor is saying. The Libs are saying, we'll repeal that. This doesn't make sense. You're 100% right. We should be getting a better return on our own resources.
We're going to be transitioning. This country is on the cusp of an energy transformation, which is going to bring unprecedented prosperity to this nation. And that is something, no, you should believe it.
I'm sorry, Michelle,
because
no
that is actually going to happen.
amount of spin can change the fact that the stage 3 tax cuts will see every politician in this place get $9,000 extra a year off on their tax when there are people having to choose between putting a roof over their heads or feed their kids. You should be mad. You should be mad. And by the way, the federal budget, on gas tax, the federal budget is making more money charging interest on student debt than it is on changes to the tax, to the gas taxes. And the final point is this, that you're exactly right on inflation. You're exactly right. And the Treasurer got up and talked about tough choices, as if that budget was tough for him. You know what it's tough? It's tough for the people choosing between paying the rent and feeding their kids, especially when the big banks announce Westpac record billions of dollars in profit that should be taxed and put towards putting a roof over people's head and making sure they have enough income and food to live a good life.
OK, we've got a few more questions. Thank you, Amy. Thank you. A few more questions to get through. We'll hear now from Lachlan Jolly.
Hey, guys, this is to whoever. Do you believe the ban placed on TikTok will extend to the general public? If not, is it really a big threat? Why should politicians and public servants be banned, but not the rest of the country? Ban
TikTok, David?
I mean, I think this is an important issue to look at, the national security side of things. I know in the Senate, Senator James Patterson has an inquiry that they're going to look at this. My focus really is looking at young people and the amount of data that's being collected on them. I think that goes way beyond TikTok. I know it's not what you're asking about in terms of bans, but that is something that I'd really like to see prioritised. And we've got the privacy review. We're doing amendments to the Privacy Act. I don't think that social media companies should be able to put hundreds of tags on young people just to market their products. We can change that.
You use TikTok, Lachlan? You try not to. Okay. Tammy loves it, apparently.
I love TikTok. I so love TikTok.
Why?
Oh, it's one of those, like anybody in the room older than me, Candy Crush. Is that still a thing?
I missed that as well.
Oh,
I must be very old.
As old as I am. I love TikTok because it's one of those mindless things that you can just like troll the universe and amazing things come and find you. But the thing is, I don't believe we should control what you do. I believe that the government's restrictions on, parliamentary devices is right. Why should we be playing on TikTok while you're paying for that bill? But I believe that we all are grown-ups in the room and we all tick that little box and read all the disclaimers about what's going to happen with our data. If you choose to do that, beware. But yeah, I don't have TikTok anymore and I'm a little bit sad. No.
No.
I know that Max does.
Max still does.
Max
on a different account, is that right?
Sorry?
Yeah, on a different account.
Yeah, he's only got 9,000 or something, so I don't really want to give him a shout out, but he needs help.
You do very well on TikTok, is that right?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think specifically on the question, if we're going to tackle the issues around data security and risks to privacy, there's a lot of important regulatory work we need to do around reining in the power of all sorts of social media companies. And I certainly think it displays an alarming ignorance about those issues if we're just going to go ahead and ban one platform. And I wonder why there's only picked out on one platform. On me doing well...
Is it a security issue? Is that... I mean, that's been the concern, right? It's... It puts people at risk.
Yeah. It's also got a lot of hate speech on it as well. Yeah. Any social media platform, that's where a lot of the hate speech and the anger and the misunderstanding of people and their barriers to life happen.
Zoe, what do you think?
Yeah, look, I understand why we moved on TikTok, particularly because it, can track your keystrokes, can collect
Face ID.
collect your contacts, it checks on your calendar even when you told it not to deal with those things. So there were particular concerns with TikTok worldwide, right? It's been banned on public service devices across the globe, and indeed it was just banned in Montana altogether, but that'll probably be rectified by the Supreme Court in terms of First Amendment. But nevertheless, it was the right move for Australia, the slow move to be taken, but nevertheless the right move. Will it happen in other areas? I'm not sure. One thing,
why not,
Michelle
though?
and
that's the question here. Why not the rest of the country? Why just politicians?
Oh, look, I
and
don't
public
think you
service?
can. I don't think you can do that. Technology doesn't lend itself to that. With VPNs and everything else, and you know, these guys in the front row, they'll tell you how to get around everything in about a minute and a half.
They know more than we do.
So you can. And I think for public service devices, for things where we're dealing with potentially top security or just secured data, it's important that they not be on those devices. In terms of what we do with social media, what we do with algorithms and others, it's fair to say the United States and Europe are galloping ahead of us now, right? In terms of their assessment of the impact of algorithms, they're looking at AI. I was really thrilled today that the Education Minister has referred to the Education Committee I sit on, a study of AI, what it means and where it will go. So there's a lot to be done. We really need to follow to have a look at what Europe and the US are doing in this space, because it's not just the hate speech, it's the rabbit holing, right? So you spend too long down on one of those YouTube or TikTok
children
sites.
are losing education because they get stuck on them, they get trapped.
Oh, I know about that. Well, TikTok's banned in my household, poor kids. Sorry.
But it's not only that, it's the others as well. Instagram, Snapchat.
Yeah, YouTube, endless. Yeah.
I know that there's something called Reels as well.
Okay,
back to Candy Crush.
Back to Candy Crush. We're here now from Amy Lewis.
I have long COVID and my husband is a lung transplant recipient. Despite the government saying that they're protecting the vulnerable and our own family strategies to avoid it, we've had COVID in our home on 3 occasions because nothing beyond vaccination is done to curb the spread. I'm now on heart medication because of it. Why doesn't our government and community recognise the health and economic benefits of doing more to protect families like mine by reducing spread in the community?
So I've just, thank you for the question. I've just finished up a report with my parliamentary colleagues. It was a multi-partisan health committee and we looked at long COVID and all aspects of it, and we smashed this thing out in about 5 months, taking December into account as well. And we had over 600 submissions from individuals as well as peak organisations. And there are a set of recommendations that are now with the Health Minister. As soon as that report was handed down, the Health Minister released $50 million for research because we badly need better data on how to guide our response, basically, to long COVID. But I agree with you. I think this is not something to be underestimated because you are dealing with a rapidly mutating virus that is mutating away from vaccines quickly.
Have we just become too complacent? I mean, are you saying here, Amy, you'd like to see tougher measures from the government on this?
I think that what we need first is education for the community. Yeah. So I go to the supermarket and watch people sanitise their hands on the way in. I don't sanitise my hands on the way into the supermarket because it spreads predominantly in the air. It's not on surfaces.
That's right. That's so bang on.
Something as simple as opening a window, you know, at your workplace.
Ventilation.
Yeah. So there's simple things that we can do, but I think people just sort of...
So there are 9 recommendations in that report, and I contributed a lot to that. Research, clinical trials, the kind of backbone to care, which we think should be GP-based, but with a lot of support around GP so they can deliver that care. Referral to specialists when required, like you with your cardiac issues and your husband. I worked at the Alfred, I know lung transplant. And the final thing, really, which I'm most proud of, is a recognition that this is spread through the air and that we need indoor air quality standards.
But don't you need to spend more on the impact of long COVID? $50 million initial funding, but you need a lot more than that, don't you? Because we don't even know yet what the long-term impact's going to be.
Yeah, so as I said, the recommendations are with the Health Minister and we're now waiting for his response to that. But this is a really, important piece of work and it's going to not only help address this issue of long COVID, but it's going to keep us better prepared for the next pandemic or the next airborne threat, which may be bushfire or something else. And that's important.
Amy, I hope things go well with you as well. As I said, we're still finding out about this, so good luck to you, and I hope that things work out for your own health as a,
Thank you.
Dealing with this. I want to bring you the result now of our online poll. This came out of our early discussion. We could have gone on all night about housing. Should negative gearing tax breaks be limited to one investment property? 80% said yes. That's out of almost 9,500 of you who responded. So, Michelle, I think there's a lesson there, isn't there? Would you take that away?
Well, you know, as you know, our national conference is coming up.
Okay.
This and a million other issues are going to be debated.
We'll put that on.
Live.
We'll put that on the agenda.
You can watch the debate. I'll be there as well.
Well, you
so
have at least one result there. And to finish up the discussion tonight, let's hear from Mohammed Mosai Allah.
I became an Australian citizen less than a year ago. Every day I'm learning about living in this beautiful Australia. My question to all the panel members is, what can you do for me to express my views without the fear of being racially abused, like Yasmin Abdul-Majid or Stan Grant? Is there any topic I should not be discussed on air or in public forum?
Zoe?
Oh. First of all, congratulations on becoming an Australian.
Yes, well done.
Yeah. Those moments for us, we all go to the citizenship ceremonies and they are the ones of pure joy. So congratulations. I hope there is nothing that you can't say. I hope you're free to say whatever you want, however you want, in a way that doesn't hurt others, of course, but that's part of the reasons people come here to live here, because it is free. You can say what you think and feel, and long may it be thus.
But what do we do, Tammy, in being able to have these conversations in a way that it's not just what we say, but what people hear? How do we open our ears to conversations that are very, very difficult to have?
Welcome home. Yeah. It's one of those things, like, my children are very open. If you've ever met me, my children, God help them. But you need to have each other's back. You need to be brave. You also need to be clear in your message. I have a habit of rambling on, as David will attest to. You need to make sure that it's short, sharp and clear. But never be afraid to speak your mind, as long as you say it kindly and with respect. The only thing you should probably try and figure out is, well, who do you support in the football and which league?
Have you got a football team yet?
I think I support the right team for me in football, which I'm not saying.
There are some things we can't discuss.
But I think I'm not brave like Adam Gooch. I'm not brave like Stan, who worked in CNN and in Australia. I just came here less than ago. They're born here. If they face this, I think what you're saying, I heard the same discussion when Yasmin Abdul-Majid happened. Adam Gooch, there is certain part of the community say, sympathize with them. But we're seeing Stan taking indefinite leave. That doesn't answer my question.
No, I know, and I apologise. It's one of those things that you need people around you to support you and help you through. And I know that Stan's got a lot of good people around him, and we're all behind him as well. So surround yourself with good people.
David, how do you approach this? If you want to have a hard conversation that you know is going to be very challenging, how do you prepare the ground for a conversation like that? Because we do have to take responsibility, not for just what we say, but also what people hear.
I mean, I'm obviously white, and I moved here as a teenager.
But you come out of a country, of course, that
from Zimbabwe,
deep racial issue.
From Zimbabwe. I moved here as a teenager. I got teased about my accent. I changed that, and I fitted in. I have a black Zimbabwean friend, moved over at a similar age, has had a totally different experience going through school. Just the amount of, you know, what people like to call casual racism that he had to put up with. And in my view, it's on all of us. It shouldn't be up to migrants to have to say, well, hang on, like, can you stop treating me differently? It's on all of us in our families, in our communities, to start creating more of a culture of acceptance and of not, and that does come down to uncomfortable conversations, actually calling things out in a way that I think at the heart is about education and actually talking people through, like, why that is not acceptable, rather than just jumping down people's throats.
As a person of colour, Michelle, do you find yourself cautiously approaching a lot of these things? Do you feel as if you can't say certain things, or you're worried about how it's going to be perceived?
I think I had that caution and that reticence when I was younger, and mainly because of the reactions that I encountered, and I probably buried it, concreted it over. And even now, I mean, I describe it in my maiden speech in a very oblique way as someone who has encountered more headwinds than tailwinds. And it's often, the barriers are often intersectional, they overlap. So it may be the colour of your skin, it may be your gender, maybe the fact that I'm a pretty short person and I'm not 6'2" or something like that. I don't know. But this, you know, it comes back again to what I said earlier, which is that it is our collective responsibility, and we can choose how we react. That's a choice. We can either listen with curiosity and with an open heart and an open mind and try and learn something from that interaction, or we can become defensive and confrontational and get our backs up. And when that happens, the gates shut for us and we lose something that could have been gained in that interaction.
Mohammed, you're in a country where people have fought for the right for you to ask a question. Where my grandfather, who was a Wiradjuri man, went to war for a country that didn't recognise his citizenship because he believed the country can be better. And that's what he gave to me, and that's what I believe. So you're in a country where we can say those things and say them with love. So welcome to Australia. That's all we have time for. Thanks again to our panel, Tammy, Tyrrell, Michelle Ananda-Rajah, David Pocock, Zoe McKenzie and Max Chandler-Mather. Please thank them. Thank you as well for sharing your stories and questions. Next week, Patricia Karvelis will be with you live from Sydney, joining her fantastic literary greats, Booker Prize-winning author Shihan Karunatilaka and Pulitzer Prize winner Geraldine Brooks, who's written a number of best-selling books. Now, you can head to our website to register to be in the audience. Now, before I go, I just wanted to say a few words. Many of you would know by now that I'm stepping away for a little while. Sometimes we need to just take time out. Sometimes our souls are hurting, and so it is for me. I've had to learn that endurance is not always strength. Sometimes strength is knowing when to say stop. And to those who have sent messages of support, thank you so much. But I'll be okay. Please send that support and care to those of my people and all people who feel abandoned and alone, who are wondering whether they have a place in this country and who don't have my privileges. To those who have abused me and my family, I would just say, if your aim was to hurt me, well, you've succeeded. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I must have given you so much cause to hate me so much, to target me and my family, to make threats against me. I'm sorry. And that's what Yinyamarra means. It means that I'm not just responsible for what I do, but for what you do. It's not just a word. It is sacred. It is what it means to be Wiradjuri. It is the core of my being. It is respect. It is respect that comes from the earth we are born into, from God, Bayami. If I break that, I lose who I am. I am down right now. I am. But I'll get back up and you can come at me again. And I will meet you with the love of my people. My people can teach the world to love. As Martin Luther King Jr. said of his struggle, we will wear you down with our capacity to love. Don't mistake our love for weakness. It is our strength. We have never stopped loving and fighting for justice and truth, the hard truths to speak in our land. Yinyamarra Winangana means to live with respect in a world worth living in. And we in the media must ask if we are truly honouring a world worth living in. Too often, we are the poison in the bloodstream of our society. I fear the media does not have the love or the language to speak to the gentle spirits of our land. I'm not walking away for a while because of racism. We get that far too often. I'm not walking away because of social media hatred. I need a break from the media. I feel like I'm part of the problem. And I need to ask myself how or if we can do it better. To my people, I have always wanted to represent you with pride. I know I might disappoint you sometimes, but in my own little way, I've just wanted to make us seen. And I'm sorry that I can't do that for a little while. To my family, I love you. And to my mum and dad, Bavadil Baradri, Gibi Diramatalinya Baju Baradri, Mandangu. Good night.